COVID-19 has impacted directly or indirectly everyone on the planet. From lockdowns, social distancing, the new normal of wearing masks, the job loss due to social distancing restrictions, and yes, even sports coming to a standstill. It seems like years ago when we could meet up with a group of people, order some appetizers, and sit at the same table at a restaurant. Don't you miss the hardest part of going out, being the diplomatic coercion it always takes to get the waiter or waitress to split a bill 10 different ways? One of the industries impacted most has been the food industry, and more specifically, the small and local, not corporate chain restaurant. Many of these cornerstone establishments rely on dine-in daily revenue to stay afloat. So COVID-19's arrival and the nearly overnight shift to a takeout-only business model has come with its obstacles. This episode was originally going to have other guests, but after recording, it made sense to dedicate an entire episode to our first guest. To understand how restaurant owners are navigating this new world, let's start our journey in Central America. I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is Wi-Fi Water. For the first part of this episode, we are going to go all the way to Guatemala, and we're going to talk to a small business owner, small restaurant owner out of Guatemala, who I met in 2015 when I was working down in Guatemala. And he's been in Guatemala for many years. I think now he's coming up on a full decade, if not already past the decade, but I'll let him talk about that. And the neat thing about this is that Jesse is also from the North Shore. So we grew up in the same part of the world. And then we, in 2015, ran into each other in the same social circle in Guatemala. And so I wanted to bring him on to get a more global insight into how entrepreneurs and restaurant owners and small business owners are navigating COVID. So without further ado, I give you Jesse Schauben of Tacorazon.
How we doing?
and also for everyone, Jesse's obviously in Guatemala, and I'm here out of Beverly, Massachusetts, and so we are remotely connecting here. And this will happen, I think, a lot, especially with COVID, because it's not going to be appropriate for people to be in the room at the same time. And so I'm super glad Jesse's here. And I think, Jesse, first off, if you just want to talk a little bit about Tacorazon, when it was founded, why it was founded, and the day-to-day, and where you were, bring us up into February of this year. Before that, if you could talk about some of that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I think we call this extreme social distancing. Um, yeah, so thank you for inviting me on to this space. But yeah, my name is Jesse Schauben. I grew up in Marblehead and Swampscott, Massachusetts. And I've been living down in Guatemala for, I'm moving on to like 13 years at this point. I think I came to Guatemala for the first time about 15 years ago, so I'm about ready to celebrate my quinceañera down here. But
you're gonna have your introduction into society.
all of it. I did my bar mitzvah back on the North Shore, and then I'm ready
Nice.
for the next step. So yeah, I moved down to Guatemala to do education work. So I have lived all over Guatemala, in big cities, in rural communities, in tourist towns, in a lot of places that barely make it on the map. And I worked for a couple different organizations, and through it all, one of the common threads was, um, while a lack of education opportunity was always prevalent, regardless where I was. Guatemala is still has the highest levels of malnutrition in Latin America, and the second highest levels in the Western Hemisphere. That ended up having reverberating effects throughout all the communities where we were working to train teachers, build schools, run health and hygiene programs, and even nutrition programs. And so much so that I got to the point where I decided to leave my job. And after I was working with all these communities, and I was talking to families who were farmers, and they were either selling off all of their crops to meet the basic needs for their families, and they were left consuming what is the two staples I'm sure when you lived in Guatemala and when I did as well, the two staples of a diet down here were corn tortillas and black beans, not comprising of a complex protein. Um, as a result, to sort of condense, I decided to leave my last job and I went in a search for organic farming, for organic farmers, and assumed that in a country where half the workers are tending to the fields, I assumed that it actually wouldn't be that hard. And obviously, that was a massive presentation of either a blind spot on my part, naivete, and it took me about a year to find a farming network that was interested in what we were doing or what I was planning on doing, and beyond that, that would be willing to take some risks with me. Ultimately, I wanted to work directly with small share uh, farmers who were growing organically, to whom we could pay fair trade for a taco shop that I had drawn up on the back of a napkin. And in 2015, I started our first branch of Tacorazon. Um, and Tacorazon is for folks, if you're listening kind of across the states, it's a fast casual taco and burrito bar. We go kind of Chipotle with a little bit more heart. So the idea is build tacos, burritos, but fill it up with organic, fair trade produce, pay our staff a livable wage, work to develop social programs through the earnings that we bring in. And we've been doing that since 2015, and it's been a lot of fun. Obviously, we've had a lot of ups and downs, as most entrepreneurs, and I think especially social entrepreneurs will run into. Um, but we were able to grow our business year over year for uh, the first 3 years that we ran the business. We were able to grow uh, some big jumps, upwards of 30% into our second year. Or into our third year, we grew that an additional 10%. The business was profitable, and I decided uh, to sell a portion of my business to an investor, and we opened our second branch. So the first branch is in Shela, and that is where the majority of the farming network is where we work. And opened our second restaurant in Shela last year in 29. Excuse me, in Antigua, a primarily the biggest tourist attraction or the biggest tourist destination in all of Guatemala, which shifted our model a little bit, but it was helping us grow towards where we wanted to be, which is a fast food chain that could play the on the field with some of the big boys, with some of the bigger brands. Guatemala has a great affinity towards Western fast food chains, specifically chains from the US. And I wanted to build something that wasn't propagating sort of the American dream like McDonald's, which is incredibly popular down here, but wanted to help build something that was a bit more of the Guatemalan dream, which would mean that the shareholders weren't bringing in funds to build their fourth houses, but that our farmers and our staff could acquire lands and build their first homes. So that sort of takes us through. It's kind of a Cliff's Notes version of the first 4 years or so of how Tacorazon is born, uh, and and what we were able to accomplish. Um, I don't know if you have any questions about that, or you want me to hop into a little bit more of where we find ourselves today.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I was fortunate enough to be around when Jesse opened up the first restaurant in Shayla. I was there on opening day. I probably had one of the very first burritos, and they're amazing. If you're ever in Guatemala, make sure you go and check out either one of the restaurants, and then he brought us all the way up to 2019 with the opening of the second restaurant in Antigua, which is great because now we're right where we are now. So you've opened up the second one. You're feeling super positive because that's going well, I assume, or maybe you want to talk about that. And then I don't know how much, maybe we don't really need to dive into COVID because I think everyone will understand that basically, you had to get locked down, things were closing. But if you want to talk about, if you want to add on anything there, and then talk about essentially how your business has evolved, how you've evolved, if you've had to shift around staff, how you're continuing, especially with your social mission, how you're continuing to support the farmers as best as you can during this tough time, and then really touch upon, I think I'm really hoping to get the silver linings because there's got to be some silver lining here,
Absolutely.
And Jesse and I about Tacorazon recently, and so it's very inspiring to hear really about Guatemala and how people have kind of shown up for one another in times of need. So maybe bring us from you've opened up in Antigua and you're rolling into 2020, and previously you've had year-on-year growth, and then how does COVID start in Guatemala, and where are we today, and share the because for every business owner, there's real conversations that are happening, and every day is a new adventure, even more so than it is normally, because things are happening on the government level. Maybe the government's saying, because up here for the restaurants, every state obviously is different, right? There's different phases and there's different stipulations, and then from there, then they have to navigate other maybe cultural things, other contextual things, if they have to fight back people who are like, oh, I don't want to wear a mask, it's tyranny. I don't know if you have to deal with that in Guatemala, but if you can start to build for the audience, especially from the United States, or not from Guatemala, what that looks like, and how you've had to pivot your business to be able to continue to navigate positively.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the points in framing this question that you brought up that's really important is understanding that I think entrepreneurship is a roller coaster at all times. Like, I don't think that too many people play the game, so to speak, if they don't love the roller coaster element of it,
the process.
Yeah, we can all become a little bit if a lot of folks are listening from Boston, it's a bit sacrilegious to bring up the Philadelphia 76ers. But I think that there is a process that one needs to trust in order to play this game. But so yeah, I mean we opened in 2019 our second restaurant. Same sorts of growing pains that you have with the first one. It's different to run two restaurants as it is one. And certainly beyond that, I think you reach a tipping point where, from everyone with whom I've spoken, and fortunately for myself, I have a lot of great mentors in the field, but interestingly enough, we're all suffering a lot of the same things right now. So the business is finding its footing in Antigua in 2019. Shayla's still going pretty well. We are growing our team. We have a management team in place, kind of running each of the day-to-day operations, which was really exciting for me. One of my first hires picks up and moves his life across the country in order to open the second restaurant, which is just, it goes back to that idea of being a social entrepreneur. Sometimes the dividends that one can cash out are probably a bit smaller than if you ran a business that did not necessarily have the social give back component. But I think what we're paid out in really an incalculable fashion is this idea that we get to see that we're creating the types of societies or communities that we really want to build. So um, I kind of digress there, but we're doing okay. We're starting to build. March is really the month that we expect to take off in. March is the lead up to Holy Week,
Right.
Easter,
Right.
and in Antigua, that is there are businesses that make 40-50% of their annual income around the lead up to Easter and Easter week itself. So we're really excited. We feel primed for it. And from December, am reading news about uh, something that's happening that feels far away, something that eventually touches base in, I guess, in Seattle, when you start hearing more and more information move from China to parts of Italy, obviously, and Spain, where I have a lot of friends who I've met over the years, to the U.S. and eventually down to Guatemala. And Guatemala, I think, unlike a lot of places, Guatemala is it's got a bit of an authoritative thread that runs through the country. I don't know if you want to, at some point, share your own perspective on that. But I think we start to realize that some things are drastically going to shift for us. Um,
And when was that? When was that specifically?
so in February, late February, we realized that uh, there are still the first signs of cases are starting to pop up, but they're really confirmed in March. They
Mm-hmm.
came
Mm-hmm.
they came in through a flight from El Salvador. I actually had a friend who was on that flight who that was the first confirmed case of COVID in the country. And she went into quarantine. She had a police presence outside of her house for 18 days
And
while she
can
was.
you extrapolate why? And I know why, but it's going to be important for our viewers. I think our viewers, our listeners, to really understand why she had the police presence.
Yeah. So, el, elements of Guatemala. Guatemala is a country that has a long history of police and military DNA in its rule. Guatemala, there was a 36-year long armed conflict, some call a civil war. I think you and I would probably add in on top an attempted genocide of the indigenous population here, in which 200,000 uh, indigenous Mayan were killed over the course of those 36 years, with a big presence of military rule. Um, but Guatemala is also, it's still a fairly authoritative country. And therefore, you asked the question of masks earlier. Well, masks have been obligatory in Guatemala since March. We were, a decree went out that if one was found without mask from one day to the next, um, without a mask on, that there would be $1,000 to $20,000 fine levied against any individual. Now, that sounds like a lot of money in the U.S. If anyone wants to extract or to play the game of how much $1,000 is, let alone $20,000 in in Guatemala bucks, it's more money than certainly the 99% of the population would ever be able to afford. But we've had a curfew in effect since March as well. We generally go from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. At times it was even starting earlier at 4 p.m. Uh, these are the levels of kind of crackdown to a certain degree. Part of it is probably justifiable. While we heard plenty of reports of, we talked about flattening the curve for a long time with COVID. I think people probably have a bit of a COVID fatigue, but to understand it from a bit of a developing world perspective, there was no choice about flattening curves down here. Like we still have um, such a low amount of beds in intensive care units or respirators or any sort of equipment that if the levels of COVID that the US is suffering or that other parts of the world that we've considered more developed for a time came through Guatemala, there's really no coming back from it. And so the country felt like, and the president talked about how things would have to be kind of returning to Guatemala's past of a bit more of an iron fist, a bit more of kind of martial law. And that's scary in a country that has such a complicated and really beyond complicated, a country that has such a devastating history, a recent history dating back, to the mid 90s when this country was still at war. And I think there's the intimidation factor, which anytime that you put a police officer outside of someone's door, I mean, that goes a little bit to the tyranny question that you brought up. I think, Guatemala doesn't deal with that so much because a lot of the country's been sort of beaten down into not having a voice. Now, if that means that people wear a face mask, well, in this case, I'm pretty happy with it. If it means that we've destroyed the collective memory of Guatemala, well, that's a bit more problematic to put it lightly.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you extrapolated on that because I think it's really important to build that context. When COVID started, I was actually in Colombia, and I was hoping to get, and this is an aside, but I was working on my own endeavor, my own entrepreneurial thing, and it totally flipped, and I was also under lockdown, and it was the exact same sentiment. It's like, look, the Colombian president in as many ways said these things, and there was a real understanding from almost all of the citizens that was like, okay, look, if we have the same numbers as Italy, if we have the same cases as the United States, more developed as one would say, then we know we're going to be just totally, it's not even going to be a game. It's just going to be, it's going to be like a wildfire without any end. And so the response that I felt being in quarantine and the same thing and only being able to go out twice a week. And if you were stopped, it was a fine that was unbelievable. Like $20,000 in Guatemala in quetzales is an unbelievable amount of money when I would say the average person makes like, I don't know, $100 to $150 to $200 a month. So it's a number that obviously they're putting to really kind of like scare, if anything. And it was the same in Colombia. It was, if you were caught, you could be, thrown in up to 6 months of jail and also have a fine that would be about $2,000 US, which is also an extremely large amount of money, where the average, where someone's monthly pay is around $600 to $700. It's not even as big as it was in Guatemala. But I'm really glad that you build that context, because I think that sometimes there's people just don't understand that, and every country is obviously having to navigate this thing at their own level. And in some ways in the United States, you can think about it, whatever state you are, think about another state, how they're navigating it, and that's kind of how the world's doing it, because the world is broken up, by different leaders, by different health professionals, and they listen to the WHO, and they probably even take some direction from even the CDC when it's good. And so it's good that you build that context. And I think that brings us right up into the next steps for Tacorazon. And before we do that though, we're going to take a really quick break. So we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. We are here with Jesse Schauben, and just to recap a little bit, we left off talking about the crackdown in Guatemala and how Jesse was feeling. He'd started reading things in December and early January, and then the global community obviously was a little bit more attuned to it by late January, when the WHO the WHO, the WHO, not the band, the WHO, said that this was going to, they declared it a global pandemic. And then through February, things obviously started to shift. And then early March was the lockdown started to happen in Guatemala. And that's obviously when Tacorazon was affected. So we can pick it up there.
Yeah, so the Guatemala actually in the beginning of this whole situation, we actually were pretty pleased. We were one of the first countries, and the second behind El Salvador, to close our borders, to really try to put up walls, kind of highlighting all the things that we had talked about before. But then I started relating everything back to the business. If we started having major group cancellations, which is a pretty big chunk of our business, whether they're university groups, volunteer groups. We cater a lot of the food for Habitat for Humanity, and I was getting notification around March 10th that universities were not going to let anyone out. I was involved in some of those phone calls, and unfortunately had to concede the point that there was too much uncertainty. So on March 15th, we drastically and fairly quickly had to change our operations. The country was putting out new ordinances every day, which were really hard to follow. There wasn't a lot of clarity on what the regulations were going to be, but over the course of that first month, we figured out a delivery system, which by no means do anything.
What does that look like? Is that bicycles? Is it mopeds? Is it motorcycles? Is it cars? Is there an Uber Eats you could have tied into and done that?
Yeah, it's sort of all hands on deck. And our staff, and I think that this is an important point to highlight before getting into the actual logistics of it. Our staff was so incredible in basically offering to throw themselves in front of this train that was coming at us so fast, of saying that people would stay late, that people would do the delivery, that people would change. Because ultimately what we started seeing at the very beginning were, you had a few different camps of people. One was those who were going to continue to operate normally, who really didn't think that this would affect us. Those, and I think I would put us in the second camp, which was, all right, we know it's going to affect us. We're not entirely sure how quite yet, but let's make sure that we are ready to adapt to the oncoming and ever-changing circumstances. And then a third set of businesses who said, I see where this is going, or at least I see the worst case scenario. I'm going to pull out, shut down immediately, and diminish my returns on anything, but certainly lower the risk that I'm willing to take on. Currently on our block, the 3 businesses across the street from us chose that, and our block, which is half a block from the park and the biggest tourist town in the entire country, is looking pretty sad these days, because since March we haven't been able to have a single customer step foot into our restaurant. So we decided to link up first with a company from El Salvador in Shela that has basically a DoorDash or an Uber Eats type service. As I'm sure a lot of you have heard, and those who have either used those services, hopefully they've kept you fed, and those who decided to do a bit more of a deep dive, see how detrimental that a lot of those third-party delivery companies can be for businesses. They take pretty big percentages, and yet at the same time, we have partnered with an El Salvadoran company. We partnered with Uber Eats in Antigua because they had the infrastructure and they were ready to go. We work with a smaller local delivery company in Antigua as well, who use bikes and mopeds and scooters, and I've become a delivery driver at times. My job has
What are you driving?
I'm rocking a little SUV that has seen better days, but I think our customers can have, for the most part, forgiven how my car looks and are just happy to get their burritos. Uh,
Nice.
and every once in a while, my hygienic or not, my dog comes along as my helper. So I think what we what we saw out of that is this incredible level of solidarity. I think people are trying to. There's certainly a movement. I've done a lot of reading, certainly, but writing in this community as well, in the markets where we work in Guatemala, about understanding that there's never been a more important time for people to buy local, to buy from small businesses, because it's always true, and we always need to keep this in mind. But now more than ever, understanding the power that the consumer has to really set up the community that will exist after this, right? I mean, I think we'll talk a little bit about what next steps for Tacorazon are. But if you read some of the reporting back in the States about the companies that see great opportunity with COVID, it's, for the most part, it's really massive chains that aren't thinking so much about their balance sheet day to day. They're thinking more of, well, how can I swallow up a big chunk of this field as either the smaller restaurants, the mom and pop shops, and that's been certainly the direction that the economy has been going for the better part of a few decades. That said, this is an accelerator if we let it. And so for us, we've rolled out, developed new menu items, developed new menu concepts. I have a lot more time on my hands to think about, we're not doing a whole lot of customer service right now. So we're thinking about how to, at the very beginning of this, the first sit down meeting I had with all team members was, let's think about the business that we're going to have when we open up post COVID. Not the social distancing rules and where we're going to put stickers down, how many tables we're going to take away, because those decisions, while we'll have a role in executing them, we'll default to the experts on that. But really, what kind of business do we want to be running, period? One, are we all committed to this? I think it was important for our staff to hear that from me, that I'm not running away from this, that it's scary for all of us, that our staff have all taken pay cuts. I gave up my salary for the time till we get through this. And at the same time, because it's needed, and Guatemala is in such a delicate state as is, we're rolling out new social programming. We've developed a program called Feel Good Friday. So today, we handed out meals to a bunch of volunteer workers. Basically, there's a program in the States that's been developed called World Central Kitchen. We've kind of played off of that, but we're linking up our food and our customer base, our community, to vulnerable populations and essential workers. So every week we have deliveries to. Last week we worked with the volunteer firefighters, and that's a term that you heard me correctly. We in Guatemala have volunteer firefighters. While certain
You know,
towns, yeah, go for it.
no, I forget that. I
Yeah,
honestly forget that. And we were talking the other day about firefighters, local firefighters, and that, many firefighters work part-time and they have another job in the gig economy or whatever. And I totally forgot that the bomberos down in Guatemala, they're just all volunteers.
Yeah.
And okay, well, it's good that you said that because I was like, wait, oh yeah, right, okay.
Right. So, we did a food delivery to the whole fleet today. Um, there are more programs that have been set up, called, basically built out of this idea of the community pot. Um, and so, like a cooking pot, la olla comunitaria. And today, we've uh, donated uh, goods to these groups. Um, but today we uh, did a big delivery to all the volunteers who showed up, because we're looking for ways to motivate them more to keep showing up and realize that we're all part of this one big community. The issue with this is it's money. So it requires money from us. And right now we're losing money. We're not making money. Um, so I have a couple customers who've decided to buy food from the restaurant, which we subsidize, so we can give up some of what our typical margin would be on a burrito, for instance, and we can make their purchase go that much further. And we're trying to put some juice back into the economy. The other program that we're developing out right now is based on an old program, social program that was born out of Naples, Italy, called uh, El Café Pendiente, or the suspended or pending coffee. It's a program where, back in the day, that people would go in and buy a coffee, say for just to translate things over, buy a coffee for $1, but leave $1 behind, so that someone who can't afford a cup of coffee can still have one. So we're trying to build out that same program right now, and the idea would be to not only, we're not going to call it the taco pendiente or the burro pendiente, but we're going to call it the pendiente because I'm developing this program to work in all sorts of businesses. The idea being, how, if I own a coffee shop, great. That's a simple one because we've seen that model. But if I own plenty of other types of businesses, how do I participate in this? How do I link up the community that is interested in keeping Guatemala on its feet? Great. If I can throw in $1, I can be a part of that. And that is independent of what kind of business I'm standing in. So that's a program that I've been working on now for a few months. I planned on rolling this out, and this has just sort of expedited the need for the program. So, uh, we're still on our feet. We got the doors open to both shops. We're running these programs. Our staff is still, they're fighting every day. They're thinking about how to innovate. They're thinking about we had we just had a baby born into our team, and I have another staff member who's pregnant right now, and it's a growing family in spite of all the craziness that's happening around us. And I think, specifically because of that, the question is, how do we keep the country open? Um, the next 2 weeks, restrictions were actually just increased after some of the relaxation of certain measures. I think we're seeing that in the States as well. Yet it's a lot harder in the States to come back around and tell people, hey, you know what? Put a mask on. I think, look at AMC, look at the movie theaters. I don't know, just this was just today that the CEO, I don't know if you saw this, but the CEO of AMC basically said, look, we're not going to make people wear masks to come into the movie theaters. We're not looking for a political controversy. And obviously it's a bit strange that we've turned this safety protocol into a political issue. But over the course of an afternoon, they had to reverse that policy and realized we're only allowing ourselves to believe that it's a political issue if we convince ourselves of that. But truthfully, I mean, we had the CDC, I think the WHO, Dr. Fauci. I think a lot of people from the beginning said, I don't know that masks do all that much, and then had to come around to actually that they're one of the biggest preventers here. So while I know that things are still going to be hard in Guatemala, truth be told, we also know that uh, that things could have been a lot worse, uh, and hopefully there are collective community decisions, a social contract that we all sort of abide by. So anyway, let me jump onto a little bit of where we're hoping to go from here. One is survival, right? Um, I think that we have conversations with our landlords, or the owners of our spaces. I've talked to them more in the past 3 months than I ever planned on talking to them, and I'm sure they me. They expect a check in the mail every month, and now it's been a lot more reading the tea leaves together. One of the owners of our spaces has been incredible in that regard. One has not been very flexible, and as a result, we're looking at moving our first location, which um, is both not fun and from a nostalgic standpoint. It's upsetting, but I think everyone is approaching things with a different set of needs, and certainly probably I think that this is an opportunity for people to show their true colors. Um, but I had someone reach out just today. I went to I broke protocol a bit. As a business owner, I have a little bit more flexibility, but I went over to Guatemala City, which is only about a 45-minute drive from where I am, because an owner of a shopping mall said, "Look, what would it take for you to come in right now? Um, Free rent for a year. We're thinking about life post COVID, not because we know exactly when it's going to come to fruition, but it's the one tool that we have left, which is that idea of hope, of vision. Because once we give that up, then we might as well, and it's no knock on these folks, but we certainly have to go the way of those businesses across the street from us in the first place, who knew that, it's either our business isn't built for this, or maybe I'm not built for this. It's not what I signed up for. And truth be told, it's not what any of us did. None of us signed up to work through a global pandemic. And at the same time, here we are. So, in our case, we want to keep people fed. Um, we want to use the earnings from that to keep our farmers growing, to keep our staff employed and rolling those burritos, to make sure that everyone has a piece of something to keep them going. And if we can use whatever earnings come out of that to feed our community, those who are literally starving. We said at the top of this, Guatemala is the highest malnourished country in Latin America and the Caribbean. There's no way that COVID is not exacerbating that. And so we got to do our part.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's really inspiring. It's so inspiring to hear that at a time when I think there's, anytime there's scarcity, it's easy to be selfish in whatever that is. And at a time of such scarcity, that Tacorazon and that you and your team are able to be abundant and show up for people is just really great to hear. And it really sticks to your social entrepreneurship. And this is probably something I should have probably defined at the top, but a social entrepreneur is different from, or social-minded business is different from a normal business in the sense that instead of just strictly going for profit, it's normally a triple bottom line where people, planet, and profit are taken equally into account.
means and ends of the business. It's not just strictly profit. And I love what you've said about voting with our wallet, because I think that that is so true. We have to prop up and we have to keep investing in the local restaurants, the local eateries that make up our communities, whether you're in Antigua, Guatemala, whether you're in, Beverly, Massachusetts, whether you're wherever you are, you have to continue to do that. Because as you said, the global capitalist machine has been pushing more towards Amazon, and Amazon, I guarantee, is taking out small businesses left and right. It always was, but now, especially on this end, with other price increases going up, like you're saying, if you can't pay to have food delivery, if that was never part of your thing, it was always a dine in, and all of a sudden overnight you have to do food delivery, and then you're paying into another third party like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, whatever it is. It just it just gets tighter and tighter, right? The budget just seems to continue to get smaller and smaller, and the margin, I guess I should say, gets smaller and smaller. And so that is an amazing way to be able to kind of, I think in this section, I knew that it was going to come out. I knew that there was going to be an actionable item for anyone listening for this to be able to take home. And that is it. It's, buy local, support local. There's never been a better time. And in some way, Tacorazon is uniquely positioned within the context of Guatemala, because you do have such great local produce that you can continue to invest in. And so, yeah, and it's great to hear that some of your landlords, not all, but, one of the landlords is willing to play ball, is willing to sit down, is willing to say, okay, how can we make this work? How can we make it so that way you can stay in the place, in the location, and also pay me something so I can, keep that money going. And then it's really interesting to hear that there is, and I love the vision. I love what you're saying. I love the vision of the owner of the mall, who's already like, yeah, let's think about post-COVID. Let's think about how this could work. Let's think about a rent-free situation where maybe there's a rev share. Maybe he gets a little equity, maybe a lot of things, and maybe you'll continue to explore that. We're going to finish up, I think, this section pretty soon. And so is there anything that you want to leave? If you want to share where people can find and learn more about Tacorazon, I know you got a website, you got a Facebook page, you got Instagram.
We're Tacorazon across the board. So .com. That's how we appear on Facebook, Instagram. You posted something the other day that I saw from one of your pages, and I had actually written an open letter to our community probably within the same week of that, as to all these incredible steps that I think we as the consumers can take when you can't necessarily vote with your wallet. Because I do think that it's really important to recognize that the hardship is not it is hitting all of us in loads of ways. I think if you show up at any of these essentially food banks or community kitchens, the folks who are most mistaken are the ones who are trying to guess who, it's more of like a hierarchy of oppression or a hierarchy of needs. And, people are trying to become their best detectives of understanding why that person who's got nicer shoes on is standing in line. It's like, we don't really know everyone's circumstances by looking at them. And so I wrote something to our community in both Shayla and Antigua on some general platforms, and saw that you posted at the same time. All these different things that we can do when, even if it's not going out and buying from a local restaurant, which I highly recommend that everybody at least once a week, if it's within your means, that when you're gonna buy, that you think about, okay, how is this money being reinvested in my community? Getting to learn those stories, getting to learn the names, not necessarily of the owners, but certainly of the workers of your restaurant. But I think hitting them up on social media, leaving a nice comment. Honestly, I've been telling people to just and I'm doing the same thing. Stopping into places to just say hi, to remind people about a purchase. But I think it's really important that we remember that we are brothers and sisters keepers. That if you used to come by the restaurant before this crisis was happening, and now you're only going out maybe once every couple of weeks to go grocery shopping, to just pop your head in and wave at us. Maybe to have a conversation every once in a while if you feel comfortable doing so. I think that those are the things that help carry us through. And so that's what I encourage folks to do.
Yeah, I mean, you know what, those two things, like, there's no one listening to this who can't do that, right? When you're out for your stroll and you're going to do whatever you're going to do, and you stop by your local restaurant and you stop in and you just say, hey, I hope you guys are well, you know, keep fighting the good fight. And then also the other thing, if you're on social media, it takes nothing to leave a comment. It takes nothing to like. It takes nothing to even take a screenshot and put it up on your story and say, hey, follow this local, whatever it is, this local, cheese shop, this local taco or burrito shop, and just say, hey, follow them. They're doing great things. And even throughout this, global pandemic, they're finding ways to continue to support people. Your Cafe Pendiente project is it's amazing. Bringing it quasi full circle back to your Philly comment, I remember years ago reading about a pizzeria that did something similar where, you'd go in and a slice is $1 and you'd pay for $2, and you would take your slice and then they would put a Post-it that you would get to write a message and you put that on the wall. And then if somebody comes in and, they can't afford food for whatever reason that day, no questions asked, take 2 Post-its down, there are 2 slices. And I think that is really humanity in action when you're paying it forward.
That's Rosa's Pizzeria.
Rosa's, there you go. A man in the industry knows his stuff.
Yeah, but unfortunately, as we see, Rosa's closed down last year,
and there we go.
and they felt like they were priced out of the market. And again, it goes back to as much good press as they got, we need folks to vote with their wallet.
Totally.
To continue to. So in that same vein, I'm going to shout out to anyone who's in Beverly, Salem, wherever you are around here, Marblehead and Swampscott, any North Shore folks, Adea's Mediterranean Kitchen, ADEA. Javi, I know you're looking for all the vegan spots. This is my childhood best friend. Opened up this incredible shop. He's a chef, but makes the most incredible Mediterranean food.
Where's it located?
Falafel and hummus. It's downtown Salem.
I was by it today. I went right by it today.
Yeah.
I went right by it because in the back
you got to go in. Head in. Tell Dovey or David. Tell him I say hello. And see his beautiful family there running the shop, and it's one of my first stops every time I head home.
I promise you, I will go this weekend. I promise. Because I was down there literally today. I actually walked right by it and I was like, oh, this looks cool because hummus and falafel, I'm in. But I think on that note, we're going to leave it. Thank you so much to Jesse Schauben, and check out Tacorazon. I'll leave all that information on our Instagram for this post.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Jesse, be well, and we'll talk soon.